This is Dylan Chang with part 2 of the final sprint. I just got done talking about the how the centipede heads decide what to do. So from here I'll talk about the spider. So the spider initializes and it decides where it should be, where it should spawn. It chooses a random y coordinate or value, and then spawns there. And then there's a random number 1 or 2 that decides whether it's going left or right. And then it calculates the upper and lower bounds according to that position. So the spider will be constantly heading up and down. It's just that when it hits what the lower or upper bound that it calculated, it'll switch. It'll decide whether it wants to. It'll switch directions. First of all, vertical directions. And then it'll decide whether it wants to stop in its place in the horizontal direction, and then it'll just keep moving up and down, or if it wants to continue moving on in the horizontal direction. When it's dead, it notifies the game manager, when it collides with the mushrooms, it destroys the mushrooms. Here's the spider factory. I don't know. Yeah. Next we'll do the scorpion. The scorpion header file has all the generic critter functions. Very similar to the spider. It determines a Y position. The scorpion actually has a pointer to the grid so that it spawns on the grid, so it doesn't like spawn in between grid spaces. It decides whether it spawns on the left or right side, and exactly the same as the spider, basically. It'll always be moving in its horizontal direction, left or right, and then it dies. But if it collides with a mushroom, it'll make the mushrooms poisoned, which we went over when I talked about the mushrooms. Next, the flea. The flea, again, very generic critter functions. The flea also has a pointer to the grid, as well as the game controller, because it needs to spawn on the grid as well, like the scorpion. It does the same thing as the scorpion and the spider, where it determines a random X position. It always spawns at the top of the screen. The flea also has a similar system as the centipede, where it checks. It has a timer where when it checks whether it should, when it's going down, whether it should spawn a mushroom in that grid position it is at, or not. The flea has health and speed. The flea again checks, has a timer. If it decides that it wants to put down a mushroom, it calls the mushroom factory and says to create a mushroom where it's at. It doesn't create mushrooms in the the topmost row or the bottom 2 rows. The flea dies. If the flea is hit by a bullet, it gets damaged and moves faster. So let's do some of the systems. So first, I'll start with the game controller, which is big. So the game controller is what controls the waves. It controls when critters spawn, It controls basically a lot of things. The wave controller, first, when it's created, it reads in from a file, wave settings, and it, here, I'll show you the file. Oops. Here's the file. I only have 3 waves now, but it reads in centipede segments, it reads in centipede speed, it reads in the number of solo heads, it reads in whether it's a flea wave, a scorpion wave, and the spider speed. The way it does that is that I use stirtoke, and this. Each parameter has an array of values for the number of waves, and it just reads in the number that's been typed out in the text document, and then stores it in those arrays. It's not the best system. I didn't have time to convert it into a struct. So here, when the game controller is first created, it creates a new blaster, and that new blaster, that method function is here. It creates a new player controller, and it creates a new blaster from the blaster factory. The game controller also creates the grid and stores a pointer to the grid. It keeps track of the active wave. I started doing player lives, but like I said, I couldn't fully implement it. It has a spawn timer, so that it checks whether it should be spawning a scorpion or a spider or not. And yeah, it signals a new wave at the end of its constructor. So in the update, like I said, there's a spawn timer which generates a random chance whether it should be spawning a scorpion. It checks whether it's a scorpion, if it's on a wave that a scorpion can spawn, and if a scorpion is not active, it spawns the scorpion. And it does the same thing with spider. Here's the new wave function. So when a new wave is triggered, it creates a new centipede head with the parameters read in from the text file, so how many segments there are and the speed of the centipede. The sound of the centipede plays here, and it also spawns the solo heads if there are any. Just very simple. And then it keeps track of the number of active centipedes. So every time a centipede segment is destroyed by a bullet, it'll subtract from that number. And when all of the active centipedes are dead, it triggers this function, centipede dead, which it adds to the active wave and then starts a new wave. Also, the game controller keeps track of if a flea should be spawning. So, well, it doesn't. Well, yeah, the grid keeps track of if the flea should be spawning, but the game controller actually spawns the flea. The game controller also is notified when the player dies, and when the player dies, all of the critters are destroyed. The grid is set into reset mode and actually resets it, and then eventually when the grid is done resetting, it spawns, notifies the game controller again and spawns a new wave, which I'll go over. So here, the reset function, first of all, it switches the reset so that the centipede knows to die, and all of the critters know to die as well. And it iterates through the whole field, checking if there in each space if there's a mushroom there or not. If there is, it'll tell the mushroom to reset the mushroom if it's damaged or if it's poisoned, and then it will go and iterate through again. And then once it reaches the bottom, which is this, it'll trigger that the reset is done, and it'll tell the game controller to spawn a new wave and a new blaster. Okay, next is the score manager. So the score manager is here. The score manager is a singleton. It just has all of the adding to the scores. It just has a total score, and it creates a new HUD. So the score manager, just very simple functions. It adds all to the total score, etc., etc. And there's also a reset score function that's not unused because the player does not have lives. So here's the HUD. The HUD is a flyweight. So the HUD includes sprite sheet, which is there, following the example based on Teal demo. There's also the font and the glyphs and etc. That's all basically exactly the same as the Teal demo's example. So the HUD does not check every update whether it should be updating the score. Every single time the score manager updates, it tells the HUD to update the score, and it will show that accordingly. And then the sound manager. Sound manager has all of the sounds. It's a singleton, first of all. It has functions for all the sounds and to stop the sounds from looping. And it also has the mute sound. Yep. Pretty simple. Checks if it should be muted or not, and then plays the sound if not. Yeah. I'm going to split the video again. So